Fourth Judges Case, 2015, Supreme Court Advocates on Record Association v. Union of India. Introduction. The Fourth Judges Case, 2015, is a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court of India in which the court examined the constitutional validity of the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC. This case is important because it reaffirmed the collegium system and declared that judicial independence is a basic feature of the Constitution. Background. In 2014, Parliament passed the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act and the NJAC Act, 2014, replacing the collegium system with the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC. The NJAC included members from the judiciary, executive, and civil society. Several petitions were filed challenging the NJAC on the ground that it threatened judicial independence. Issues before the court. In the Fourth Judges Case, 2015, the Supreme Court of India was called upon to decide important constitutional questions arising from the introduction of the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC, through the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act, 2014 and the NJAC Act, 2014. The main issue before the court was whether the 99th Constitutional Amendment and the NJAC Act were constitutionally valid, or whether they violated the basic structure of the Constitution, particularly the principle of judicial independence. Another crucial issue was whether the replacement of the collegium system by the NJAC diluted the primacy of the judiciary in the appointment of judges of the Supreme Court and High Courts. The court examined whether giving a significant role to the executive and non-judicial members in the NJAC amounted to executive interference in judicial appointments. The court also considered whether judicial independence is a basic feature of the Constitution, and if so, whether any constitutional amendment that weakens it can survive judicial scrutiny under the basic structure doctrine. A further issue was whether the presence of the law minister and two eminent persons in the NJAC, along with the veto power given to any two members, could lead to politicization of judicial appointments and affect the impartiality of the judiciary. Thus, the Fourth Judges Case raised fundamental issues relating to judicial independence, separation of powers, constitutional supremacy, and the limits of Parliament's amending power, making it one of the most important constitutional cases in India. Judgment Decision. The Supreme Court of India, by a 4:1 majority, struck down the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act, 2014 and the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC, Act, 2014 as unconstitutional. The court held that judicial independence is a basic feature of the Constitution, and any arrangement that dilutes judicial primacy in appointments violates the basic structure doctrine. The majority found that the NJAC compromised judicial independence by giving the executive and non-judicial members, the law minister and two eminent persons, a decisive role, including an effective veto, which could lead to politicization and external influence over judicial appointments. Such dilution, the court said, undermines the separation of powers and the impartiality of the judiciary. Consequently, the court revived and restored the collegium system as the constitutional mechanism for appointing judges to the Supreme Court and High Courts. At the same time, acknowledging concerns about opacity, the court invited suggestions to improve transparency and accountability within the collegium's functioning. Conclusion. The Fourth Judges Case reaffirmed the primacy of the judiciary in appointments, protected judicial independence as part of the Constitution's basic structure, invalidated the NJAC, and reinstated the collegium system while opening the door for procedural reforms. Significance. The Fourth Judges Case, 2015, is of great constitutional significance because it reaffirmed judicial independence as a basic feature of the Constitution. By striking down the 99th Constitutional Amendment and the NJAC Act, the Supreme Court of India made it clear that Parliament's power to amend the Constitution is limited and cannot be used to weaken the independence of the judiciary. One of the most important contributions of this judgment is the restoration of the collegium system. The court held that giving the executive and non-judicial members a decisive role in judicial appointments could lead to politicization and external pressure, which would seriously affect the impartial functioning of courts. This ensured that the primacy of the judiciary in appointments remains intact. The judgment also strengthened the basic structure doctrine, reaffirming that even a constitutional amendment can be struck down if it violates core constitutional values. It highlighted the role of the Supreme Court as the guardian of the Constitution, capable of reviewing legislative and constitutional actions. At the same time, the court acknowledged the shortcomings of the collegium system, particularly the lack of transparency and accountability. By inviting suggestions for reform, the judgment opened the door for improving the collegium's functioning without compromising judicial independence. The significance of the fourth judge's case lies in its firm protection of judicial independence, revival of the collegium system, reinforcement of the basic structure doctrine, and affirmation of the Supreme Court's role as the final protector of constitutional democracy. It remains a crucial case for LLB examinations and Indian constitutional law. Criticism. The fourth judge's case, 2015, has been widely criticized despite its strong defense of judicial independence. One major criticism is that by striking down the NJAC, the Supreme Court of India restored the collegium system without adequately reforming it. Critics argue that the court protected independence but ignored serious flaws such as opacity, lack of transparency, and absence of accountability in the collegium. Another important criticism is that the judgment is seen as judicial overreach. Parliament passed the 99th constitutional amendment with near-unanimous support of both houses and ratification by a majority of states. By invalidating it, critics argue that the court overruled the democratic will of Parliament, thereby upsetting the balance between the judiciary and the legislature. The decision is criticized for excluding the executive completely from the appointment process. Critics believe that some level of executive participation is necessary in a democracy for checks and balances, and total judicial control may lead to institutional isolation and self-selection. The court acknowledged the defects of the collegium system but failed to lay down clear guidelines or a transparent mechanism to correct them. Leaving reforms to future discussions created uncertainty and allowed the same criticized system to continue. While the fourth judge's case strongly protected judicial independence, it is criticized for reviving a flawed collegium system, limiting democratic participation, and exercising excessive judicial power. The judgment reflects an ongoing constitutional tension between independence and accountability, which remains unresolved in India's judicial appointment process. The fourth judge's case is a milestone in Indian constitutional law. It upheld the supremacy of judicial independence, struck down the NJAC, and restored the collegium system, reinforcing the role of the Supreme Court as the guardian of the Constitution and a key pillar of Indian democracy.